Detective Clover and the Mystery of the Manor by Arnold. Chapter 1. The House and Its Occupants. Bright. That was all Clover could see. Warm, bright light. It held everything in its palm. Past, present, future. Its fingers stretched on endlessly, dancing above a great flame. A strange green light grew behind their eyes. It was beautiful. It consumed their mind, like a candle burning to the wick. Slowly, agonizingly, the wick was consumed, with no chance of escape. The green light drew closer, and with each moment, Clover could feel their body burn. The light lit their nerves ablaze, eating up every non-feeling that Clover had ever experienced. Their body drew closer to the outskirts of the light, where fear raced faster than blood. They didn't know what was outside the light, but only that it had proved to be terrible. That was all they could feel. They wondered if it even mattered. It didn't. Clover forgot it all when they awoke. The first sensation Clover felt was the overwhelming feeling of noise. Everything was buzzing, sudden and jarring. It was the marching machinery. Their face itched, so they scratched it. That was their first movement in the new world. Opening their eyes, Clover's first sight was an elegant room. The walls around them were embossed with gray flowers, which bloomed as if it were a warm spring day. But the window next to them said otherwise. Through the floor-length glass roared a violent blizzard which engulfed the room. White flakes molded into the frame, seeking vengeance on the building for daring to stand. They were strangely at peace with it all. Once again, the loud stomping rang out into Clover's room, and while they had not heard it the first time, they made the immediate connection that it was the very same noise which led to their sudden consciousness. Clover was quickly aware of the coldness of the room, which created chill so extreme it felt as if pins and needles were stabbing their skin with great repetition. The cold was dry and brushed against Clover's eyes, as if it were envious of their moisture. It had no regard for the quilt around them. After forcing their eyes closed, Clover began to breathe in a way so unnatural they struggled to recall where they had learned it. In for 3 seconds, out for 4. The door creaked open, and another blast of cold air hit Clover's face. "Stay asleep," a voice in their head warned, and Clover listened as they attempted to cease the rapid beating of their heart. Harsh, heavy footsteps hit the room's wooden floor and approached the canopy bed until Clover could no longer feel the frigid breeze against their face, signifying that something was in front of them. Clover could feel their hands sweat viciously despite the cold and dug their nails into their palms to keep a steady, unconscious-like breathing pattern. The trick must have worked, as Clover heard the footsteps patter away. They allowed a shaky breath of relief to escape their lips and propped themselves up on their bed before almost shrieking at the sight that befell them. Standing in the doorway was a tall person with unnaturally yellow hair and dark eyes, one of which was covered by a monocle that looked right out of an ironic parody made to insult the upper class. She readjusted the monocle as she scanned Clover's face. "I knew you weren't sleeping," a strange voice said, one that was at complete odds with the body it came out of. "She's never been wrong. Doubt she'd start any time soon." The person collapsed into a plush armchair next to the bed, letting out a sigh. Clover could not get past the vibrancy of her hair. It was the color of the light around them, like golden thread. "She?" Clover replied, not out of an actual wanting to know, but because they felt the need to respond. The word sounded harsh, which made sense, as it was their first one. Blondie didn't reply, but Clover saw a glare forming on her face. Her cheeks were flushed red, cold and poreless, like a doll, and the features above her cheeks were painted haphazardly, with uneven eyebrows and blotchy freckles. Her eyes were dark, like the shadows of the very room they sat in. There was no warmth in her eyes, human or not. "She wants to kill me," they thought. "She wants to kill me in this beautiful room." "This was my room, you know," Blondie spat. Clover wondered if she could read minds. "They made me sleep in the library forthwith." "Forthwith?" Clover interrupted. I am tired of your questions. Blondie fidgeted with her monocle with one hand and gestured to the bedside table with the other. She looked young. Too young for a monocle. How Clover knew this, they had no idea. Food, Blondie clarified. Bright fruits and a glass of strange purple drink were placed carefully on a silver tray. Loose petals decorated it like snow. They traced the metal details with their hands as they sat it on their lap. It soothed their sweating palms. Clover wanted to ask for her name, but when they turned to her, Blondie was already gone. Blondie would enter the room 3 times after that, 2 times to bring food, but the 3rd to bring another person. Clover had finished poking at their 3rd full tray. The thought of eating the strange food made them ill when it happened. They were still confused and resting, mind reeling with restlessness, and there was a silence all around, so the sudden knocking struck a pang of fear into Clover's heart. It rushed through every vein and released out of Clover's palms a sweat. They looked at the tray of the mysterious pink jelly, swirling its cubed fruit like a poisonous, sugary sludge. Clover had not left their bed all day, paranoid of what would happen if they did, but the knocking continued. The person expected to be let in. Clover crept out of bed, their legs creaking as they did, and watched as their diaphoretic hand hovered over the doorknob, awaiting their instruction. Swallowing their fear, they opened the door, revealing the perpetrator of the persistent rapping. A girl of short stature stood before Clover with bandaged eyes. Her short hair was cut choppily, and her bangs were so short they stuck out like antennae. With an eerie voice, the girl spoke. "Will you let me in?" This was how Clover found themselves with another stranger sitting in the chair next to their white canopy bed. Clover had the urge to lead her to the chair until the thought emerged that perhaps she would have found it rude. Alas, she made it to the chair without Clover's help. Fidgeting with the hem of their shirt, they read small embroidered initials on the wrists. R.W. "You are silent," the girl said. Clover shook their head in an attempt to shake out their fear, not that she would have seen it. "Hello." It felt strange to speak. "The fabric was from some of my old dresses. My brother altered them for you since your other clothes are drying. I'm sorry." The girl seemed to enjoy wearing bright, frilly things, which was proven by the fact that Clover's sleeves had 3 layers of lace on the cuffs, matching the girl's superfluous pink gown. "Thank you," was all Clover could come up with. They didn't understand why she was apologizing. "Do not thank me," she paused for a moment before adding in a whisper. "We are being watched." Clover looked up to see Blondie standing in the doorway. The contradiction of the 2 girls perplexed them. Blondie large and imposing, and the dark-haired girl seeming so small. Somehow, they both intimidated Clover. They wiped their hand on their nightgown. "Is that all?" Blondie asked, her voice solid and unmoving. "Yes, I am tired," the girl replied, her sentence halved by a yawn. When she stood from her chair, she faced Clover one last time. "It was nice speaking with you, Clover. I do hope you'll stay." Before Clover could mention that they barely spoke, she left with a sweep of her gown. It was long after the door shut that Clover realized that they had never told her their name. Somehow, it did not shock them. The next day, there was yet another knock on the door. However, it was unable to stir Clover from the depths of slumber that embraced them. It was far into the morning when Clover woke up, and when they did, they found a note on their left bedside table and a bundle of fabric at their feet. "Be downstairs at 8, the note told them, and Clover had reason to believe that being late would not end well for them. Clover thought of how peculiar it all was as they opened the bundle. It was filled with fabric, clothes, they soon realized, a silver pocket watch, and a note with handwriting that did not match the other. It read, "I don't have the time to come and check on your health today, but according to Dorothy, you've been doing all right. Here are your clothes and the possessions we found. You must have questions. Please be patient with me. P.S. Don't mind Dorothy. She doesn't mean it." The sentences were choppy and hurriedly written. Ink was smudged across the page, but the new stranger was correct. Clover was confused. They knew that they weren't as scared as they were supposed to be, but perhaps that was intentional. Perhaps they were being lulled into a false sense of security. The note also mentioned someone named Dorothy, who was either Blondie or the girl with black hair. Clover assumed it to be the former. The dark-haired girl didn't seem to match such a name. Buttoning up their gray waistcoat over the new shirt made Clover uneasy, for they knew it wasn't new, nor was it new to them. They tied a yellow bow tie around their neck with muscle memory. They slid the pocket watch into their waistcoat and focused on steadying their breathing, one thing at a time. The windows beside them were still frosted, and through it was a colorless nothingness. There may have been land beneath all of that white, or perhaps the house resided upon a cloud, lost and untouched. The light reflected off of it, like a great candle in the sky. With those thoughts racing through Clover's mind, they walked out of the door of their room and realized that they did not know where to go. The hallways were endless and narrow, and on the walls were tall wooden bookshelves filled with tomes, art, and dolls. Upon closer inspection, Clover deduced that they were most definitely dolls, but they were not the fabric ones given to children. They were like nothing Clover had seen before. A rainbow of eyes looked back into Clover's own, each detail painted beautifully, each joint meticulously carved, yet each one was unique. The details were not perfect in an identical sense, but they were perfect for what they were. Man-made. Human. "They're nice, aren't they?" A voice uttered, snapping Clover out of their daze. This voice was different from the girl, or Dorothy. It was somehow softer, sadder. "Yes," Clover replied, their voice still hoarse from lack of use. However, after looking around the hallway, they couldn't find the source of the voice. A creeping feeling appeared along their spine. "Thank you. They took me a long time," the voice said again, echoing, still hidden. Clover looked at the candlelit ceiling above, at the dingy maroon carpet below, and all in between, and still there was no sign of who was speaking. In a panic, Clover stumbled past the bookshelf in the narrow hallway, revealing an opened door that was covered by the shelf. It stood hidden from the rest of the hall. Inside the door stood a figure not much taller than Clover, but their silhouette was all that was visible in the shadows. The only other thing they could make out was long wisps of white hair peeking from the darkness. It was like wind was emanating from the room. Clover felt an eerie chill trickle down their spine. "Hello?" Clover gasped. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I startle you?" The person squeaked. A gloved skeleton of a hand extended from the shadows, lightly grazing Clover's shoulder before whipping back to the darkness. "I suppose I'm used to being seen no matter where I am." "Whatever do you mean?" Clover heard their voice choke out. Despite the voice changing to speak in a friendlier tone, it was still hard to make out the face that belonged to it. They saw a large mass of hair consume what little sight they had of the person's face, and a sharp nose could be seen if they squinted. Loud footsteps stomped up the stairs across the hall, echoing loudly through the corridor. Dorothy must have been looking for Clover. The person squeaked again and turned to close the door, but not before whispering, "You'll see me again soon. Then we can speak." He held out a hand, which Clover took. The man's hand felt brittle in Clover's, but this handshake was firm. Was this the gentleman of the house? "I must leave now." He turned away momentarily, before adding, "You may call me Teddy." "Clover." "I know," he said, returning to the shadows. Clover's feet hit the hardwood staircase in a solemn pattern, left foot down, right foot down, until the guest and occupant descended to the bottom floor in complete silence. Dorothy seemed to be the sort of person who preferred not making conversation. Or maybe she wasn't, and was purposefully trying to make Clover uneasy. Whichever one it was did not matter, for either way they were silent. Dorothy's tall boots made loud cascading noises beyond the dining room staircase. Clover had assumed before that she was more vertically inclined, but walking next to her only cemented the fact. They barely stood at her shoulder. As the two entered the dining room, Clover's past anxiety returned. Something was wrong. Every room had a sour smell of mold, but it was the strongest here. They tried with great difficulty not to scrunch their nose in front of their hosts. Or were they captors? They still weren't quite sure. And there was no doubt in Clover's mind that the house was as old as the very dirt it was built upon. It seemed as if the walls were one harsh breath away from total collapse. That was, of course, assuming that the house was not in the clouds. If they thought the hallways were cluttered, it was nothing compared to the dining room. Dust clung to all as if glued in place, and vines grew from the ceiling so thickly that they covered most of the windows, resulting in the candleless ceiling being consumed by never-ending darkness. Bookshelves once again stood at every wall, and yet there was still never enough. Stacks of books swallowed each morsel of empty space in the large room, and with many various antiquities using them as convenient display pedestals. There were rolls of old paper and fabrics of all colors hanging from the shelves. The room was so overwhelming that Clover barely realized that there were already people sitting at the dining room table, old and rotted. Sat there was the girl from the day before, head tilted downward. Her hair was different than it had been the last time. Clover saw her. Gone were her choppy bangs, and in place was a curly mop of dark-styled hair. Half of the hair had been curled and cascaded down her back, while the other half was brought up on a bunch at the top of her head and tied with a ribbon. Clover was unable to look away. The style was too impressive to call anything but positive attention to it. Beside her sat a tall stuffed animal, but Clover was unable to deduce the species. It looked like a cat, maybe a fox, but with hands. They couldn't figure it out. Their footsteps echoed in the large room as they made their way to the table and took their seat. The questions regarding the new species of animals were not important, so Clover tried to steady their gaze on their hands. The stuffed animals stood from their chair, as every normal stuffed creature of unknown origin would. Clover sat frozen. Was this supposed to be happening? They also wondered if the girl sitting at the table was a doll as well, due to how still she sat. It wouldn't have been the weirdest thing by far. Clover kept surprising themselves at how calm they felt. Their hands were shaking in the cold, but apart from that, nothing about them indicated that they were feeling anything but confusion. They disliked the silence given by the house, and they disliked the mystery even more. What a strange group of people, they thought endlessly. "Your stuffed animals move?" they asked, which was less a question and more of a statement of the obvious. The girl looked up, indicating that she was, in fact, alive. Clover found this fortunate. Her eyes were gray, and the two large scars went down her eyelids, like a clown. A hidden vindictive part of her brain supplied. "He isn't mine. He's his own stuffed animal." Clover was beginning to grow tired of everyone's riddles. "Well, all right, then your friend, who is a stuffed animal, moves?" "Yes." Clover shuffled anxiously in their chair. They really didn't like silence. "My brothers made him for me," she said in a voice that seemed to disturb all chatter. No matter where in the house it was heard. "That's lovely." Dorothy sat next to Clover and glared. They wanted to say something, but the words were trapped in their throat. "May I ask why?" Clover began to say before a crash bellowed from upstairs. "Sweet Vera!" Dorothy shouted, pushing the chair away and falling when one of her large sleeves caught on one of the wooden arms. Clover could barely see her run up the stairs through the stack of books and clutter. The thumping of her shoes was magnified by her anger and the echo of the dining room, and it would have been a comical sight if not for the setting it was placed in, and the situation that led Clover to see it. Soon, the animal returned with a large silver tray with many plates of food. Clover looked at their surroundings once more and saw a large painting of something they couldn't understand behind the young girl. Clover tried to ignore it, but the painting kept drawing their gaze. "Could you pass me that, please?" Clover asked her, pointing to a plate across the table. It was filled with a variety of cooked meats, bacon, ham, and sausage. Like the rest of the plates, the smell that wafted from it was entrancing, but dangerous. Clover's stomach growled with a deep, conscious yearning, but they were adamant on their refusal to eat. Poison was not a memory they could recall, but an all-too-familiar sensation they could feel on their tongue. The girl didn't move for a moment before reaching to the other side of the table. Clover looked behind her at the newly revealed portrait while she was occupied. It looked abstract at first glance, almost nonsensical. But on second glance, looking closer, they began to see small red winding patterns that reminded Clover of a web. Once they saw the web, they noticed the color shift between the lines of the web, revealing the overall image. Two red eyes pierced through Clover, and all at once, they felt their senses return to them. The fear, the emotions, and the large delayed reaction to the overwhelming situation that Clover finally found themselves worried about. They were not in their house. They did not know where their house was, or if they even had one. They needed to know what was going on. The girls sat to the plate in front of Clover, but it was obvious that they had not noticed. After a choked whisper, which was supposed to be, "Sorry," Clover attempted to leave the table with whatever dignity they had left. "What are you doing?" Dorothy demanded, but when she noticed their face, she stepped aside, allowing them to leave in silence. That was the last thing Clover remembered before they felt a sharp stabbing pain in their head and fell to the floor, down like a sack of books. The voice in their head spoke once more. "You asked a blind girl to pass a plate to you. Have you ever heard of something so foolish?" The other parts of their body murmured in agreement.